and feel proud of myself for remembering that. Uh, and then I'll turn it over to Amy Mikel, who's the Director of Customer Experience for Brooklyn Public Library, to talk us through this work she's been doing around cardholder sign-up policies. Thanks, Amy.
All right. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Some of you are probably joining later on in the recording, so welcome, everybody. And my talk today, as you can see here, is called Cardholder Sign-Up Policies, Access and Practice. So what we're here to discuss today is how we might make the simple act of getting a library card as accessible and as welcoming as possible to everybody in our community. So of course, that the work to structure library card policy and process at our libraries is not actually simple at all. There are many considerations that we have to think through along the way as libraries, as decision makers. But if you haven't critically looked at that process for a while, it might be time to do so. The reality is that in some cases, how we structure library card sign up might be set up in a way that has some barriers or some roadblocks kind of baked in for different kinds of people. So how might we start to revisit and restructure our cardholder sign-up policy and process to be as welcoming as possible, as accessible as possible, and yes, as practical as possible, because we all have boundaries and limitations and considerations in our individual libraries. So basically, my goal today with this presentation is that you walk away from today's session with a good grasp, number one, on how those barriers to access can show up in the typical registration process, and that number two, you can leave with some tools and strategies to sort of audit and reevaluate this process at your own library within your own set of considerations. Okay, so my name is Amy Mikel. I'm the Director of Customer Experience at Brooklyn Public Library, and you can see the right-hand side of your screen here, a map of the borough of Brooklyn with all of our branch neighborhood libraries highlighted. So we have 62 neighborhood libraries in our system. And for those of you who don't know, Brooklyn Public Library, or BPL, and New York Public Library and Queens are three separate and distinct library systems, and together we serve the residents of the 5 boroughs in New York City. So in my role as the Director of Customer Experience, I oversee BPL's circulating print, media, ebook, and database collections, and I also oversee the policies for patron account management and material circulation across all the neighborhood libraries. So basically, I oversee what we lend and how patrons get access to those things. And I see that people are introducing themselves in the chat, so I'll ask you to continue to do that for me if you're just joining. I'd love to know who's here today, just your name, your title, and your affiliation. So with a library, or if you're here for some other reason, I'd love to get to know you in the chat. So thank you for doing that. Okay, here's the plan for today. And by the way, you may have noticed my voice is kind of raspy. Forgive me for that. Been having a little thing going on with my throat. Anyways, here's the plan for today. I will start with a short case study at Brooklyn Public Library. So I want to kind of just help everybody understand how I've been trying to do this work at BPL. We've had a lot of cleanup we had to do in our own registration process over the past couple of years. Then I wanted to share a little bit more, and probably the reason you're here today, obviously, about our work to research library card sign-up policies at scale nationwide. So our cardholder sign-up policy research. I'll take some time to talk about that research and obviously what prompted the research, what we learned from the research, and most importantly, how you can benefit from what we collected and what we learned, how you can access and use that data. I'll also be sharing a little bit more about an emerging policy framework that we've been developing to help you and to help libraries across the country with their registration policies through the lens of access. Amy mentioned earlier, I'll also be sharing something you'll have access to later in the webinar follow-up, an action plan. So I'll be introducing a template that we've created for you to evaluate the registration process at your own library and it's especially designed to help you look for potential barriers that might be lurking there in your own process and how to flag some of those areas that you actually might be able to immediately make some changes. There's obviously probably going to be some areas that are a lot more trickier and will take a longer time. There may be some areas that are that low-hanging fruit where you can make pretty quickly and without too much of a hassle. So that's the action plan that we'll have available for you, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. But I wanted to start with a question for all of you, which is, what is one thing that you would like to change about the way patrons get library cards at your library? And why? Why do you want to change that? So just think about that for a minute and put that into the chat. What's one thing you'd like to change about this process at your library and why? All right. So start with a little bit of a backstory here. Starting about 4 years ago, in my role as Director of Customer Experience, I was taking a second look at our own overall process for issuing library cards. So over the years, and who knows how many years, it was a lot of years, this whole process had grown really unwieldy at PPL, and it was just could really benefit from some streamlining, fresh pair of eyes. And frankly, there were a lot of little finicky areas that just needed some guidance and clarification for everybody, staff and patrons alike. So we did all that basic work, of course. We redid our forms, we streamlined everything, we simplified everything. But also in doing this work, I kept bumping up against common scenarios that to me were feeling like they were just unnecessarily complicated, and in fact, even probably prohibitive for some of our patrons. So I'll give a few of those examples. What to do if somebody comes into one of our neighborhood libraries for a library card and they're technically living in New York City, so they're already eligible, but in fact, they're just staying with relatives. So they can't provide our standard bill or a bank statement or a piece of mail to validate that place of residency. So they're eligible, but they aren't able to go through our normal proof of eligibility process. So what do we do? How should staff handle that situation? Another example, what should we do, or does a child need to be present when their parent signs them up for a library card? Basically, like, we needed to reflect as a library system on some of these scenarios and decide what we wanted that guidance to be. So how would we land on all of these different scenarios? Why or why not? So we needed to be able to justify those decisions. And then, of course, once we landed on what the process should be, we needed to make sure we had that clearly communicated to staff and that it was available in writing for our patrons. So literally everyone was on the same page. So we had to decide and then make sure everybody was on the same page. And there was just a long list of these sort of unresolved scenario type questions I was working through one at a time. I was trying to figure out what our guidance would be so we could issue that guidance to staff and make it a uniform process. And of course, in that whole process, I needed to figure out where in some cases were we actually being too restrictive for no good reason. And really just be very critical about why some of our procedures were what they were, and draw that logical line and move forward. So this slide contains a little snapshot. Of course, it's not everything, just to give you a taste of all of the work that we've done as a result of that rethinking. So the major thing that happened was in fall of 2021 when all of the New York City libraries officially went fine-free. So of course we were unofficially fine-free during the pandemic, but in fall of 2021, we made that official. And as a result of going fine-free, BPL was able to kind of restructure our fine-free policy. And in a nutshell, what we did is we made it so that patrons of all ages for any material types were billed for overdue items after 2 weeks, so a much tighter time frame, and that after 14 days overdue, those accounts were blocked from physical holds renewals and checkouts, but that those accounts were still able to access our digital collections and services, and that digital access would not be impacted even if they were blocked from physical lending for some reason. So I'm sharing that because we decided to be pretty conservative in that respect around materials loss, but what that did is it allowed us to open up a lot more options on the front end in terms of library card signup. So then, starting in fall 2022, we released a host of other updates. We kind of packaged this all together and rolled it out all at once. So we reintroduced a new limited access card type called a welcome card. And this is available to patrons who are eligible. So they're physically in front of us, or they're shown through geolocation that they're located in New York State, but they are unable to provide ID, that photo ID and address required for a full access library card. So limited access card type is primarily digital access for online access and computers and printing, with a small number of physical holds and checkouts permitted. So 3 holds and 3 checkouts on physical items as part of that welcome card type. So for the first time, BPL was able to give patrons a path to access who were falling into that gray area. And my overall communication to staff there was, you have this option now. There's only, I can't think of too many scenarios where you would ever be sending somebody away without a library card. Don't send somebody away. They're coming to get a library card. Please, let's get them a library card. And we have a process for you to follow now. We also introduced a new preferred name field, so we were not collecting that previously. And we did the work to eliminate and purge gender data from all of our patron records. We also made youth sign up for, in our case, youth are considered 12 and under. We made that a lot more accessible for families by creating an online sign up process and collecting parent signature that way, in addition to in-person sign up. And we modified our teen sign up so that although we still collect mailing address from teens as part of the record, we ask for proof if they have it, but if those teens weren't able to provide proof of address, then it was not required as part of the sign up process. So previously we were sending teens away who were not able to provide proof of address, and we tried to fix that. Other little things like deciding that we would accept P.O. Box as mailing address as long as they were able to provide secondary address of eligibility in New York State, and lots and lots of other finicky things like that I don't have room for or time for here. So in a nutshell, we really tried to simplify the whole process, and we took a second look at what we were collecting and why. And we made sure to restructure our fines and fees policy from end to end so that we bill and block on a shorter time frame, but we're not blocking patrons from library access on the front end for different reasons, only when the materials don't come back. So while I was working through this whole process, I really felt like I was feeling my way around in the dark. And I wished that I had more information to work from or to consult in order to make decisions. Of course, I was talking to other libraries. And the truth is, of course, you can contact other libraries. Everyone's very friendly. You can ask people what they do, but when you're trying to find out why they do it that way, it gets a lot trickier. Some libraries don't even know why they do things a certain way, and that's the reality. And just in general, it's kind of a threatening question, like, okay, thank you for letting me know you do it this way and leaving it that way, but not saying like, but why? That seems silly. So yes, of course I was talking to libraries, but it's a very one-off, and I wasn't able to get to the root of why those policies were designed that way, which is those are the things I really needed in order to justify my decision making at Brooklyn Public Library. And of course, I was looking as hard as I could, but I could not find any professional guidance or best practices to refer to, especially in the realm of legal considerations. So of course, I wasn't necessarily looking for the answers because I needed to make the answers. but I would have loved to know what questions to even ask. So all of that, oh, and by the way, this all happened at the same time during the same time frame when a lot of the book banning was beginning to ramp up. So around the 2021, 2022 timeframe. And I was just feeling like the work that I was doing was becoming more important than ever. So I wanted to make sure that we weren't turning away legit eligible patrons who had a right to access our library card and all of our resources and services. And this was becoming a key piece for me, or something I felt like I could do in the fight for intellectual freedom, that where a library card is the equivalent to the freedom to read. And that I was feeling more strongly that we should be talking about this library card sign up thing more explicitly together as a profession and supporting one another and doing this work in a little bit of a more organized way. So in a nutshell, all of that is what prompted me to decide to try to do this work and prompted the concept of this research. So about 2 years ago in spring of 2023, BPL launched a project, and it was really a project in two parts. So the first part of the project was researching and collecting data about how public libraries across the country do library card sign up. And to my knowledge, this data has not been collected recently, if at all. So I really felt like this was step one in the process to try to create a baseline for reference of what libraries do in this one specific area of policy. And then part two of the project was to then take what we learned and take what we collected from the research and begin working on a policy framework for everyone to use and for everybody to benefit from. So with funding from the Mellon Foundation, we hired a market research firm to help us collect all this data and to analyze it. We did all this work in the fall of 2023. So we launched an online survey. It was about 65 questions. And we also ran 3 focus groups. So the first focus group was in person at the Association for Rural Libraries conference in September of 2023. The other in-person focus group was at the Urban Libraries Conference Annual Forum in October 2023. And then in November 2023, we also ran an online asynchronous focus group. And all that data collection wrapped up by December. And altogether, we were able to collect data about cardholder registration policy from more than 2,000 public libraries across every US state and DC. So it was a really wonderful turnout, much more than I had expected. And I really credit our partnership with PLA and the Urban Libraries Council and Association for Rural and Small Libraries and COSLA to help us promote this work and get the word out and help people to understand how participating in the data collection was designed to benefit everybody, including themselves. So we had a really great result from our research. And last April, 1 year ago, we published the results. So the full report summarizing our findings is available on the Brooklyn Public Library website. You can see the link there on your screen. And in the report, we lay out everything. We lay out our methodology for the research, so you can see all the questions that we asked in the online survey, as well as the questions that we asked in the focus groups, and all of everything we got back, and our analysis of all that data. Not just how we do things across public libraries, but why we do them that way. And I really don't obviously have time today to go super in depth into the findings. Of course, I will highlight a few things, but I do encourage you to go take a look at the full report off our website. If you're interested, you can download it for free. And there's a few other tools available to you as well on that same website. So there's an interactive data dashboard that is available for you to play with. You can turn on and off different filters to see the results, how the results kind of shake out in different ways. And you can also get access to the raw data set by request if you'd like to have that as well. So again, those 3 resources, the published report, the data dashboard, and the raw data set, are all available for you on our website. if you'd like to learn more in terms of what other libraries do, not just in terms of sign up, but account expiration and renewal and different card types and youth sign up and how they, what is their process to revise policy and all these different things. We really tried to get all that down and make it available in one place for people to take a look at. All right, so I had asked everybody a question a few minutes ago, and that question was, what is one thing you would like to change about the way patrons get library cards at your library and why? So I wanted to go back and see what people posted. And Amy, I'm wondering if you were able to pick out a few things for me as well.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
there were a few common threads. So one of the common threads was related to age requirements and specifically to teen access without a parent or guardian signature.
Yes.
So that was one thing that was pointed out. There's also there was some common threads around college students' access. So related to access to public libraries in the
Yeah.
place where they are students, and also access for the public at college libraries. So that was kind of interesting. So one was about how it can be tricky for college students to access public libraries if there's proof of address requirements.
Or a
And
parent signature or something. Yeah.
Mhm. And then some of the others were about, there was one about extending temporary signups to a longer time period to enable better access, and also easier signups for people who might be homebound.
Mm-hmm.
And this might relate to that, the options to have different types of signups, so including online only signups.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking through these now. Yes, these are very common barriers that show up and that it's not so easy to change necessarily at the library. It's sort of those long-standing policies, being able to structure a good argument for changing those policies is very difficult. I'm looking through them. Okay, well, thanks everybody for sharing. So again, pointing towards the information at a bare minimum, at least you can able to reference what other libraries do and say like, see, we're not the only one that does it differently. A lot of other libraries do it differently. All right, so this slide on eligibility is just a snapshot of some of the data we collected in our research just around this one topic, the topic of eligibility. And what I mean by eligibility, first of all, what I mean by this is um, the first set of questions we asked was just around your typical adult full access card, because we asked a whole set of questions later on in the survey and focus groups about youth access, because it's very different. So the slide that you're looking at was just around eligibility requirements for your typical adult full access card. What I also want to clarify what we mean when we say eligibility is it's a two-part question. So who is eligible? How do you define eligibility in your service area? And then how do you determine eligibility? So that's what we mean by eligibility. Who is eligible and how that eligibility is determined. So it would not surprise anybody to learn that most libraries, about 75% of the libraries that responded to our survey, they asked to see proof of eligibility, and they basically do that by, some sort of photo ID and address verification. But what I wanted to point out is that what that means, if you do this very simple math there, is that then a quarter of the libraries also told us that they still have those eligibility requirements, not a total free-for-all, but they just don't ask for proof. So 25% of the libraries we surveyed don't ask for or require proof during the library card sign-up process. Now, of the libraries that do require proof, so the 75% of libraries that say, yeah, we need to see proof, 55% of those libraries, that's the first graphic you see on the left-hand side of your screen, told us that they always require proof of eligibility. So those libraries told us that in their official process, they have no exceptions and no workarounds to issue library cards to patrons who in fact might be eligible, but they're not able to prove that they're eligible. So another data point of note here in the center of your screen is that 39% of the libraries that we surveyed told us that they require a government-issued ID as part of the proof of eligibility process. So if you don't have a government-issued ID, then the sign-up process seems to be a little bit abruptly shut down at that point. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, 24% of the libraries we surveyed told us that they do not give any consideration to patrons who may like to provide a name that does not match their legal ID. So while we take a minute to kind of sit and reflect on this slide for a minute, I wanted to ask people again to post something in the chat. And my question to you is, would anybody be willing to share about how their library has maybe tried to make their adult registration process as accessible and welcoming as possible? So do you have any workarounds or official policies or process that you're proud of and that you would like to share in your library? Okay, so preferred name. The name on the legal ID does not have to match the one on the account. Great example. And we've found that anecdotally at BPL, we actually have patrons writing to us, thanking us when we made that change in process. We have people taking the time to write to us and thank us for making that option available to them. Yeah, whatever ID somebody has, yeah, if it has your face on it, we match your face on the ID with the face standing in front of you. Right. We recently added a temporary card for homeless patrons. It gives them 3 months access with limited checkouts. Right. Okay, so while people continue to think about that or maybe post, I have another sequence of slides. There are about 9 slides where I am using that data dashboard that I referenced a few minutes ago and specifically filtered for New York State. You can see that in all the slides I'll be sharing to show you how this breakdown is taking place just in our state and with New York libraries that answered the survey. So this slide is asking libraries to tell us what information do they collect during sign up. So obviously you can see here in that column, first name and last name in New York State and New York State libraries, the representative sample is required in all cases, basically like 93, 94% of the time. But also that 14 or about 15% of libraries don't collect a preferred name. And that further down, like a few lines down, that email address, an email is required in all cases during sign up at about 21% of those libraries that answered in New York State. Phone number is required in all cases, 65% of those libraries. That gender is required, about 8% at 8% of those libraries. And that in terms of collecting identification number, so specifically something like a driver's license number or a social security number, that it's required during the library card sign-up process at about 10% of libraries here in New York State, based on kind of the representative sample of what we collected. Okay, is a government-issued ID required for adults to receive a full access library card? And 26% of those libraries in New York State told us that yes, it's required always. Others have said that, yeah, but we make some exceptions in different cases. And then you can see here that 48% of libraries told us no, it's not required. So they obviously have other ways that they collect what they feel are legitimate photo ID to meet that photo ID requirement, even if it's not a government issued photo ID. Okay, is there any consideration for names not matching legal ID? We asked that question a few questions later, and 25% of those libraries in New York told us yes, about 9% told us no, no consideration made. And, obviously a few said, well, we don't have this right now, but we're working on something. It's in development. That was interesting to collect as well. Does the library offer cardholder sign up for patrons unable to make it to the library in person? That could apply obviously to people who are homebound or in the hospital, or, that also applies to a young person who can't easily get to the library. And many libraries told us that yes, so 64% yes, we have a pathway to cardholder sign up for those unable to visit in person. But flip side, 15% of those libraries told us no, they don't have a cardholder sign up process available for those patrons. Obviously, yes still said, sorry, we don't do that now, but we're working on it. Does the library provide information about using the library, your lending rules and what you get with your library card? Does that library provide that information to patrons at the time of sign up in languages other than English? So basically, do patrons who don't speak English also have access to information about use of their library card? And most libraries, 69%, told us no, they don't have it available in other languages. Okay, here we go into youth, youth access. Very thorny. Do children and teens receive a library card with limitations on access based on their age? Most libraries said no. And we say, like, basically as compared to adult cards, is the access the same? Most libraries told us no, but 25% of libraries said yes. When we issue that library card, it contains limitations on access. Now, obviously, some libraries do that in certain scenarios only, like if it's done through the school or other reasons. But what we're trying to get at is, just in general, like generically for your youth library card, does it contain limitations on access? And of those who answered yes to that question, we were trying to get at what what limitations those were. Typically that shows up in either the types of items that can be checked out or the number of items that can be checked out. Most of those libraries who said yes, that card comes with limitations, told us that those limitations show up in the types of items that can be checked out. It's basically that card only permits basically, like access to the youth section or only certain kinds of materials in the adult section. And then others told us that the limitations show up in terms of the number of items as compared to the adult card. So maybe your typical adult card allows for 50 checkouts, and then your typical child card only allows for 10 checkouts. Okay, do children and teens need stated permission from an adult to receive a library card? And 66% of those answering our survey coming from a New York library said yes, up to a certain age. What's interesting is that there's 18% of libraries here in New York State of that kind of sample we collected that never ask for it, that there is no process in place to collect permission from an adult to receive a library card. And of those libraries who collect that permission, we then asked a follow-up question about what age that's no longer required. So you can see here, it's like kind of all over the place here in New York. But that a lot of people at 24% there just ask for it until the patron turns 18. Oops. And the why, why 11-year-olds or why 15-year-old, why is it no longer required? That's something that we're also trying to get at, and I'm in fact trying to figure that out at BPL as we speak, because we no longer ask for it after 13 years old. Anyway, so it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly when you start looking at what you do and why. Okay, so earlier I mentioned that this project was in two parts, and the first part was around the data collection, and the second part was taking what we learned and creating some guiding principles around cardholder registration for public libraries. So since last summer, BPL has been facilitating a working group to do this work. And it started out with about 30 libraries and in kind of the first round of this. In our current round where we're refining everything, there's about, give or take, I don't know, like 15 or 18 libraries or so helping me develop this policy framework. And first of all, it's on track to publish and be available on our website in June. We're going to release it during ALA when we present on this topic at ALA, and it's going to be a final draft. So the whole point is that we want libraries to use it and then help us refine it further. But it's definitely going to be available for people to start using at their own library in late June. And what it what's in it is some big picture guiding set of best practices and recommendations for different areas of cardholder sign up. But then we also are developing policy briefs that do a deep dive and go really in depth into different more thorny areas like youth sign up, digital access, etc., etc. And those briefs will also contain case studies. It's just like really designed to help people, decision makers at libraries, directors and administrators and board trustees, to kind of really have all the information in one place to make a good decision. We also, as part of this, will have kind of a workbook for libraries to use, like a set of questions to ask, so they can apply that to their own library and their own situation. So we absolutely know that this is not a one-size-fits-all process, that libraries are different. They have to make different decisions in terms of how, their governance structure and their funding structure and their local laws and regulations. So this is really meant to be a tool to bring it way down to your level and help you make the best decisions for your own library. And actually, in a few slides, I'll show you some of that language and some of those prompts that we're developing in the different areas of registration practice. And what I mean by that, this slide really shows, to really try to boil it down for you, some main areas just in the just in the area of cardholder registration policy and process, where barriers to access may be likely to show up. So these are common areas of library card registration that may be likely to contain rules and procedures that can create inequitable library access in terms of in our communities, just in terms of who can get a library card or not. Or maybe you can get the library card, but it's kind of like a little bit more of an arduous process or a little bit more complicated for you than for somebody else who may fall into kind of like our norms and can follow the easier path to getting a library card sign up versus a more complicated or unwelcoming path for people in different situations. So really quick, I'm going to run through these because I have more slides coming to talk about ways you can sort of pressure test the way you set up your policy in these different areas. So really quick, eligibility requirements basically is who is eligible and how is eligibility determined. So earlier people were talking about things like, well, I have students that go to school in my service area. They might not live there. That's a great example. So who is eligible is a really good question to ask yourself. And then how do you determine that? Data collection is basically what information do you ask for during sign up, and what information do you collect and store about your patrons, and how do you manage that data in the long run through your ILS, through your policies regarding data retention and management. Digital access and youth access are very complicated, but digital access is basically, well, there's a few considerations in this area. One we sort of touched on already. So does your library require visiting in person to sign up? And why? And what are some reasonable workarounds you can make there? And then how might you structure different kinds of library cards to and structure the eligibility requirements around digital access, like your ebooks and databases, and how might that look different in terms of computer and printing access. And then youth access, of course, is another tough one. And there's a whole range of questions we can ask ourselves here, ranging from, do you have to be a certain age to get a library card and why? Or demonstrate a certain ability to get a library card, like being able to sign your name? Why? And the whole thing about parent or guardian signature, and what are they signing for exactly? And up to what age is that required and why? And more importantly, how might a young person get access to your library's resources and services if they don't have a parent or guardian available or willing to sign for them? Language access is pretty straightforward. Not just the process for getting a library card, and maybe making applications available in different languages, but how do you invite people who might not speak English into your library in the first place? So they and sort of break through those conceived notions of what's collected for a library card in the first place. So like basically the outreach side of it, the sign up side of it, and then once they sign up for a library card, is the library able to make information available to them about how to use the library in other languages, if those people, of course, are in your community that speak those languages. And then patron information and communication, along with staff training and guidance. We can have all these rules and we have our policies and we design things to be welcoming, but it's so important that patrons understand those things. They feel invited into the library and that they understand what they get with their library card, and that information is easily and readily available to them and updated on a regular basis. But that staff understand these things and they understand why the policies are structured a certain way and the importance of following those policies consistently, depending on who's working that day or if you have more than one branch in your system. And that you have a process in place to learn from and collect information from patrons and staff about how the process feels to them, and that you can continue to be reflective and change your library card registration policy based on what patrons and staff are telling you. So we're getting pretty short on time, and I will flip through these really quick just to give you a sense of the kinds of questions that we'll be making available to libraries in our workbook. And I'm using the same categories here. So I will be flipping through these quickly, but don't worry, you will have a copy of the slides later on. And again, these will be showing up yet again in the draft policy framework that we'll be publishing in June. So eligibility, other kinds of circumstances, how does your library do this stuff? Data collection and management. There's some questions to ask yourself. I'm gonna keep going, guys, sorry. Remote registration and how your library structures digital access. Sampling of questions around youth access. Give you a minute to process. And then those categories that are so important, which is making information available to patrons in a variety of languages as needed, and how how have you thought through your staff training and communication process for all of this as well. And as Amy mentioned, we have a document that we'll be making available to you. It's your action plan. It's not very long, it's just 4 pages. It just asks you a set of questions structured around those same common scenarios that I showed earlier. And it prompts you to write down what your library currently does, to reflect on why you do it that way, and then prompts you to think through some areas that you might be able to make some quick changes, either in changing the process, which is a lot less complicated most of the time, or in some cases even changing or reinterpreting the policy. And then it also asks you to reflect on some of the things that will absolutely, most definitely be really hard to change, and what you might need to do in order to tackle those things. So both listing out the low-hanging fruit and the things that will require a lot more of headwinds. And then finally, just so that you know that BPL isn't perfect, there are definitely still things where we have some work to do. And just wanted to show you that in some cases, it's not always about opening access, opening access, opening access. There are areas where we kind of pulled back a little bit, and we were reflective on why we were doing that. So the most recent example is this past January, a few months ago, we reinstated a fee, a $1 fee to get a guest pass for our library computers. Previously, they had been free. In fact, we made them free right before the pandemic because of the 2020 census. So we've had free guest passes for like 5 years, and we were seeing so many issues cropping up as a result of that. And most importantly, that adding a fee to the guest pass with some common sense workarounds for staff who, for patrons who couldn't pay that fee, really helped drive people who were eligible for a library card to get that library card and unlock more access to the library instead of just printing out a free guest pass every day. We have continued to make improvements to our online sign-up form. I literally have a meeting later today where we're going through a specific specific aspect of our online sign-up form to try to clarify something for patrons. And then I'm continuing to kind of interrogate why we do things a certain way at BPL in terms of collecting parent guardian signature, and trying to go back to the drawing board and restructure that. And that includes our use of our juvenile restricted cards, which is an optional card type we offer that only allows checkout at the children's section of the library. So more work to do. Is my point here is that, like I said, BPL isn't perfect either. And secondly, it's an ongoing process. It's never really done. We're always thinking about how it could be better, or how we should rethink the process and rethink our assumptions. But anyways, with that, I wanted to leave about, like 8-9 minutes for questions. You can either unmute yourself or post it in the chat. I have the chat window open here, and I'm just following along. So what would everybody like to know?
I can kick us off with a question while we're waiting to see for folks to chat in. And I'm kind of curious, it's basically based in like my personal experience at the public library I was at before. But I was curious if we didn't have any kind of formal policy for staff members who aren't in management to like review or, suggest changes to certain policies. Like it wasn't written down. So do you have any tips for people who might not be in management or like among the board of trustees, if they want to suggest changes to sign up policies, like on ways to approach management or board members?
Okay, well, the first thing I wanted to say to that question is that it's best practice for a library to have a policy about reviewing their policies in the first place. Not just library card registration, but all policies. All library policies should be on some kind of review schedule. And some of them might need to be reviewed more frequently than others. For example, like your privacy policy or your technology policy should probably be reviewed more frequently than your dress code policy or something. But best rule of thumb, and this actually shows up in the New York State standards guidelines, is that every policy is reviewed at a minimum every 5 years. And I think that makes sense. So it's not just about this particular policy and arguing for why we should revisit it. Just put this policy on the same schedule as every other policy. Now, in the like how to do that, I mean, you can do it different ways. You could create a staff working group to advise administration on basically rereading the policy and advising on changes. Some libraries are willing to go the extra step of opening it up for public comment. We just simply do it very informally here at BPL. We're just constantly refining it. Like I just said, I have a working group that meets on a regular basis. I myself am committed to it, so I don't wait for somebody to tell me what I know. I can see with my own eyes. And we basically take staff seriously whenever somebody brings it up. Like the PO box thing was not something that was part of any formal review. Somebody just basically slacked me or emailed me about the PO box thing, and I was like, huh, that's a good point. Let me take a look at it. And then we were able to make a decision and fix it very quickly. So without droning on and on, I hope that answered your question, or maybe other people thinking the same thing. Obviously, you have to follow your process for policy revision at your library. Think critically about process revision. So policy revision is one thing, process revision is something else. And what I mean by that, if your policy says, uh, you know, patrons must show proof of eligibility, well, how you decide to do that in process can be done very differently. And you might have a lot more leeway than you think about staying true to the spirit of the policy.
Great, thank you. And I don't know if you saw Heidi chatted in that what I see a lot is a library may have a policy or certain practice, but they're open to making exceptions under certain circumstances. While this makes sense to me, do you have any recommendations for ensuring that different patrons don't face a different set of rules or expectations at sign up if they happen to get a different clerk or a director or something like that? It's a great question.
Great. Okay, so thank you for that question. And the first thing I'll say that is that if you need to have that sense of trust with your staff and open communication, because like you need to try to figure out where staff are regularly making exceptions to the policy. Because if staff are regularly making exemptions to the policy, it's time to change the policy and have a very clear, something clear in writing about what to do or how to make exceptions in different cases. And the BPL example of that was our welcome card. So, we had lots of staff who, when a patron couldn't show proof of address, would make them the library card anyways. And that's great because they felt like, give them the library card, who cares? But it just helps everybody, and it certainly helped patrons that staff now have a standard process to follow in that one scenario. And then the other thing, so that's the one way to answer that is find the areas where people are regularly making exceptions and create an official process for people to follow. And the second thing is that's where the staff training and communication is really important. And this is something I do regularly. You almost can't do it too much because there's so many little finicky things that come up during library card sign up, and people just want to know what to do and they want guidance. Is to remind people what to do. When this happens, this is what you do. When this happens, this is what you do. I send that out regularly in email. Like I pick a different thing and I review it with people. Or we have like regular talkback sessions with the circulation managers where they can ask questions, and we say like, oh, I never thought of that. There's definitely things out there that I still don't know are happening and I need to address. So that like that dialogue, and like I've said this before, it needs to be a two-way communication where administration is writing things down so you can refer to it in writing, so that the different clerk or different director, like they're literally breaking the rules, or they're not adhering to the guidance that is very clearly there. And that you have that, you can have that dialogue and communication with your staff so they understand why the guidance is what it is, or they can help you see where you're like short-sighted and you need better clarification, and that they understand the values behind the guidance. So they understand why the policy is set up a certain way and they're not resisting it. To the best of our ability, people will do it, but that they understand basic professional ethics like privacy, access, information, like information access, information literacy, and intellectual freedom. All of these things are baked into why we do what we do, and why libraries are sort of shifting gears away from like, let's protect the books, to let's open access to our communities. So that's how I would answer that question, Piety, is that it will always happen, but um, the best guard against that is regular, clear guidance for your staff and regular communication and training.
Great. Well, thank you. I will talk slowly in case anyone chats in a final question. But thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. Just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, we'll send out the recording and the slides and the action plan. When this closes, when the meeting room closes, you'll have a link if you want to request a certificate, and I'll send that out as well. And then thank you primarily to Amy for sharing all of this information with us. I found it really interesting to think about my experiences at public libraries through it, and I think it will be really helpful to the field.
It was so interesting. I started doing this work a few years ago, and it's so interesting because there's so much to unpack and repack, basically.
Right.
Right. So here's my email if you'd like to reach out to me. Thank you so much for being here and just being willing to, yeah, think about and reflect on these things with me. So just thank you for even being here. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And have wonderful days, everyone. And I'll be sending some follow-up communications soon. Thanks again, Amy.